So hello and welcome to the next Babies in Common videocast. I'm Jeanette Messit-Fram, the owner of Babies in Common. I'm an internationally board certified lactation consultant, childbirth educator, mostly retired birth doula, and I have 2 teenagers. And then there's Melissa, who's my co-host.
Yep.
Go ahead, Melissa.
Hello, everybody. I'm Melissa Ann Dubois. I am an OBGYN nurse practicing in the state of Massachusetts. I've worked in all sorts of settings, inpatient, outpatient, high risk, low risk obstetrics, and I'm currently working at a community hospital taking care of new parents and their babies in labor, delivery, and postpartum. I've been a childbirth educator for about 10 years, and I'm also a certified lactation counselor, and I bring all of that experience with me to these podcasts, as well as being the mom of 3 small, very rambunctious children. We have a very great episode for you again today, and thank you all for joining, and for all returning guests, thank you for coming back, and thank you for sharing with all of your friends. Just a disclaimer before we get started with our wonderful guest and learn about who she is. Anything that Jeanette or I say during this conversation is not to be taken as medical advice. Please consult your own qualified healthcare provider for questions about you or your baby's health. Also, the opinions expressed in this podcast and videocast by Jeanette or I or any of our guests or participants are the personal opinions of those people and not in any way representative of any employer, hospital, clinician that they may work for or have worked for in the past. All of our conversations are HIPAA compliant, and for a full review of our disclaimer, please visit babiesincommon.com/disclaimer. Also, remember that this video cast is interactive, so if you'd like to ask a question, you can raise your hand by using the emoji reaction, clapping emoji at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or you can simply wave your hand and unmute to ask a question or type it in the chat box, and Jeanette or I will be sure to put it in and shoot it out to our guests. And other than that, back to you, Jeanette.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. So today is April 29th, 2020, and today we'll be discussing things you can do with your baby during your daily routine to help you connect, play, and bond. And our special guest today is Melanie Salort, who I've known for a very long time now, who is a pediatric occupational therapist who specializes in sensory processing and infant parent mental health. And she works near Boston in a large privately owned clinic that specializes in sensory processing in pediatrics. And she also has her own part-time private practice. She lives also in central Massachusetts, where Melissa and I live, and she has 2 children. So I hope you'll enjoy today's conversation and participate as well and share it with your friends. And I love today's topic. We're moving away from the previous conversations we've had have been very focused on birth and breastfeeding and new babies. And now we're talking more about broadening that to all parents and all children. And one of the most fun things to do as a parent is finding that connection so that we can bond with our babies. So let's talk about how to do that and some of the really cool techniques that we don't always think of as a technique. So there's always more fun things that Melanie can share with us. So, all right. So thanks for joining us today. Hello, Melanie.
Hello. Thank you guys for having me. This is wonderful. And yes, we're all home, probably enjoying some time of playing and wondering what else to do with our time. So I'm looking forward to sharing today what I've kind of put together. So I appreciate you letting me do this. All right. Yeah. And I do want it to be an open conversation. If there are things that are coming up, comments, I know this is kind of an open forum. So, feel free to do that. And before I kind of go into sort of play ideas or even thinking about that idea of connecting and bonding and playing, one of the things that I like to think about first is really what is the availability that your baby has to engage in play. And when I say the word baby, I will try to refer to young babies. There's newborns, there's sort of the, they're getting ready to explore, and then there's the real mobile baby. So I'm not trying to brush sort of a general tone here. So I'll try to be specific when I'm talking about, the age range of the baby. But getting back to sort of the availability that I was mentioning is the idea of watching for baby's cues. How do you know that your baby is ready to play? How do you know that they're ready to connect? And so, parents who already have a baby, what was a time where you really felt attuned? What was a time that you really felt connected? What would you consider a successful playtime that you had with your baby? And think about what you noticed. Was it eye contact? Was it a stillness? When I think of a young baby, like a newborn, 3-month-old, there's kind of a stillness that they have in their body. Their eyes are very much glued to your face. They might, there might be some cooing, there might be some sounds they make. So these are all the cues that babies tell us that they're ready to engage and play. Just like they have the cues to let us know that they're hungry or their diapers need to be changed, there are cues to let us know that interaction is something that they want. The other thing to think about with that is these can be very fleeting moments, and they can last for several minutes depending on the time of day. You know, I even think of ourselves and our own level of attention that we have. It sort of fluctuates depending on the time of day, the mood that we're in, if we're fed, if we're well rested. So those are all the things to be thinking about. When I also think about ready to engage, there are also signs to know that this engagement is getting to be too much for baby. They might look away. They might, for the younger baby, there might be some hiccuping or yawning that happens. For older babies, there might be some protest. They might really physically move their body away from something. Those are also cues to watch for. All of that is very typical. That's their way of letting us communicate what they're ready for and what they're not ready for. And it's an opportunity for us to either engage and enjoy that time, or it's a time to just give them some space and wait for them to then, rejoin into play. So that's sort of what I want to think about first as we're sort of talking about bonding, connecting, and playing, is thinking about, is my baby available to do that right now? So.
One thing as a parent that I love about baby wearing, for anybody who's baby worn, you probably have similar experiences, or if anybody's pregnant, you might have maybe thought about registering for a baby carrier, and there's many different types out there, is that when my baby's right on my chest, I can really catch those fleeting moments, maybe when they're able to be more interactive, or, I notice that, my daughter Marcy's like gazing into my eyes, or sometimes even now that she's a little bit older, she's about 9 months, she'll like literally grab my face,
Exactly.
like, Mom, like,
look at me.
I want you to look at me, right? Especially with her 2 older brothers running around, sometimes my attention, all the time, my attention is divided. So I love that part of baby wearing, because you are so right that babies kind of fluctuate between these periods of like awake, quiet alert, active alert, drowsy, sleepy, all of those times pretty quickly sometimes. So.
Very quickly, right. And Melissa, you actually brought up a really good point, and it is something I even think about, and that I even wanted to talk about too, is the idea of baby wearing. And the other point that you brought up, it's the moments that you have together, actually face to face, and it's also the moments that you're doing together, but maybe looking at something together at the same time. So that is a form of engagement. That is a form of connecting as well. And you also brought up the nice different, stages and states that a baby may go through. And, this sort of calm, alert state is sort of the perfect opportunity where you can insert the times for playing, and the time for engaging, and the time for bonding. So thank you for bringing those points up.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I can't say enough wonderful things about baby wearing, and there's so many different ways that you can do that. I know that was my experience working with Jeanette as a new mom, and finding all the different ways that you can wear your baby. So the other thing that, as we go into more specific maybe activities, The other thing, it was funny as I was looking at the title of this and thinking about daily routines, right? As occupational therapists, a lot of our role is thinking about what are the roles and occupations that a person has. And some of that involves what they do day to day. And then I'm kind of putting ourselves in the context of where we are now and how probably everyone's daily routines have been drastically changed into, whether it's working or not working, being at home more. It's interesting how even the idea of daily routines have changed for many people. However, a positive about having a baby is that their needs are constant, and they have needs pretty much minute to minute from needing to be fed, needing attention, needing to be held, needing to be changed, needing to be soothed. So when I'm going to be speaking of daily routines, I'm thinking about these sort of more care routines that we're doing in our day and how we might be able to integrate moments of connection and play into them. So how are we doing so far? Anything coming up before we're good?
I have a question for you, Melanie.
Yes.
So you just mentioned it a little bit, but could you flesh out a little bit more what an occupational therapist is and why would they work with a baby?
Okay. Well, that's actually a very good question. We probably should have started off with what an occupational therapist is, because I'm not helping babies or children find jobs. That is not my role. So occupation.
That actually was going to be my next question too, because as a nurse, I think of an occupational therapist as someone who helps adults like after strokes, for example, like with fine motor skills. So that was my question too.
Right. Well, an occupational therapist, the idea of occupation stands for what people do in their daily life. And it also signifies who they are and what their roles are: parent, mother, sister, teacher, friend. And as an occupational therapist, our focus has to do with function. How does that person function in those tasks and roles that they do? How are they able to participate in the fullest capacity? And or what is limiting them in their ability to participate in those daily routines? And so for children and babies, as an occupational therapist, my role is thinking about what their occupations are. And that is, oftentimes building relationships with parents. It can be play and motor development. There can be, as the child gets older, it could be things like learning and sort of preschool skills that they might need to be developing. So there's sort of a range of how an occupational therapist would work with children. Specifically with babies, a lot of times it has to do with development. There can be, as we're talking about the different states and babies moving through different states, there could be these regulation pieces. Babies more fussy, more colicky, maybe difficult to soothe. Those are all areas where an occupational therapist, as well as, feeding, picky eating would also be another area. But you're right, Melissa, in that, occupational therapists can be seen in other in other locations, like hospitals for rehabilitation after strokes, maybe even after hip replacements and things I have completely forgotten leaving college as to what those OTs do. I have only worked in the pediatric world, and so playing and having fun and making friends and building relationships and all of that has been my focus. So.
But it was also interesting that you were talking, when Melissa said like working with stroke victims on their fine motor skills. Well, babies are also working on gross and fine motor skills. And so there's so much of that. Plus also babies are supposed to be integrating their primitive reflexes, which they're born with. And sometimes they don't do that. And then they're unregulated and it just manifests in these fussy babies. So in the work I do, helping babies feed, I'm looking for that. And sometimes I can give some small activities for them, but there's a point where I need to refer them to you. And figure out, okay, why is this baby so unregulated? What's going on? Is there more activities that an OT would know than I should know as a lactation
Mm.
consultant? And it's a nice like team approach.
Very much. And I love that you brought up those points. I've gotten to see you in action, and it's just magnificent how you look at that whole picture, and thinking about these sort of early movement patterns and the idea of how they can support, in many cases, the development of our, well, they support so much more than our gross and fine motor development. There's, there's things like regulation, our ability to sort of, that suck, swallow, breathe pattern. All of those are supported by, how our body moves and works together. So that in and of itself could be a whole other topic. But you're right. I always see it as sort of a collaborative approach that I get to do when I get to work with other professionals. We all sort of have our lens, and our goals happen to be the same, but we're looking at things in a different way, and can collaborate on how we get to that end goal together.
The other thing I wanted to add to that before we get into like what really is bonding and what activities can you recommend is that I love the idea, and I know you used to work for early intervention, but whether a family, well, first of all, if you find that with feeding or with trying to connect with your baby is just crying a lot and fussy a lot, and just you can't, it's so hard to get them to calm down. It's hard to even get them to want to eat. There's all these different ways it manifests, whether you're breastfeeding or not, or sometimes it's the reason you're no longer breastfeeding, which I wish I
Mm-hmm.
could have helped you beforehand. But sometimes it's figuring out, okay, even if my baby's doctor isn't saying you should see an occupational therapist, it's something that you can self-refer yourself for early intervention or for private, like with
Right.
you on a private practice level, because it's different in how early intervention services are, which I think everybody should have access to those. But sometimes having somebody that's more specific like you can be also helpful. And just remembering that it's not always your baby's doctor that's going to remember all these cool people that you can get support from.
Right. Absolutely. And I think even thinking about being in that situation, it is really hard to know, what do I do? Who is the person that can help me? And you're right. A lot of times they will ask their pediatrician these questions, thinking that they need their, I guess, their sort of this, what, referral to see.
Except
Yeah.
sometimes they just say, there are still some doctors out there that will say, yeah, well, your baby's you're really fussy. It's just colic. They'll get over it by 4 months. Keep them upright after feeding. And you're like, that did not solve the problem at all. And I have
No.
2 more months to go.
Right.
So that's always hard to.
That's exactly what I was going to say. If I had a nickel for every parent that told me that they asked their pediatrician about their fussy baby, and was told just to put the baby on anti-reflux meds, I would be a millionaire.
Right.
And so, it's kind of like that analogy of when you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Pediatricians have a toolbox. Chiropractors have a toolbox. Lactation consultants have a toolbox. OTs have a toolbox. And in the toolbox of a pediatrician is medication. It doesn't mean that they're bad or wrong for recommending it, but that's the tools that they've been taught. So I think that it's hard to maybe know when could an OT or when could a lactation consultant be the right choice. One big red flag would be if your baby's so fussy they're going to put the baby on medicine. Maybe you should consider seeing an IBCLC or an occupational therapist before considering that, because so many times it could just be a feeding issue. I've even had friends who are bottle feeding that benefited from a lactation consultant, a lactation consult, because lactation consults, as Jeanette likes to say, IBCLCs are baby feeding experts, whether that baby's feeding with a bottle or with a breast. And so, keep that in mind too, that everybody has a different toolbox, and an OT can be an absolutely wonderful consult to have before maybe considering starting their baby on medication, or, in worst case scenarios, getting surgery. I've heard some people have consults for that as well.
Wow. Yeah. Brilliant points that you are bringing up, and one of the great reasons why this is such a wonderful resource, because I think that unfortunately a lot of things have been siloed. This is what this specialist does, and that's what they're going to be only looking at. This is what this specialist does, is what they only look at, and it's hard to sort of see the sort of benefit of having more of a collaborative approach. I do have, which I'm happy to share, it's a sort of checklist of when you might refer to an occupational therapist, and this is divided into infant, toddler, and preschool. Sort of, it's not a comprehensive list, but it's a sort of a top 10 things you might think about in that. So I will send that to you, and you can feel free to share however you want.
That would be great.
All right.
But as a segue, you can also start by doing all these fun activities with your baby and see how that goes.
Exactly. And I think that's a good caveat, is that, some of the, I don't want to describe activities as a how-to, because I feel as though as a parent, as someone who is with your child most of the time, and who have known them their whole life, it's important to sort of think about maybe the points I'm going to share, think about how that fits for your child. And how does it go? What are some things that you notice, and does that mean that maybe a referral is needed at some point? Maybe. So I think we'll kind of check in about some activities, and this is where maybe some questions can come up too. So again, so when I'm thinking about activities, I'm thinking more of the ingredients that you would consider when you're doing activities, and not so much something super specific. And so this is probably a very redundant topic, because it's become so mainstream, is the idea of tummy time. This, who doesn't know what that word is now? Which in some ways is great, because it means that it has an importance. But we also have to know that, for the baby, why I like to think about tummy time and getting your baby on the ground, or getting them into that position where their belly's on a harder surface. It doesn't even have to be a hard surface. It can even be on your chest. The baby has spent, in the womb, their time is very fluid. They can access many different movements with their body. They have freedom. Well, to a certain point, they have freedom to move their body. But minutes after birth, they are now having to learn about gravity. And their bodies aren't moving the same way they were moving in the womb, because now gravity is teaching them some lessons. And so tummy time, or in getting your baby in that position, is one way they can start to learn the powers of gravity, and how they're going to be in a relationship with it for the rest of their life at this point. So, and when I say tummy time, this doesn't mean the traditional sense of what people might picture is, putting them on a play mat, on the ground. It certainly can be that. But, oftentimes I hear parents say, well, they don't like that position, or they cry when they're in that position. And this is where different adaptations can come in. And so one of the things even Melissa just mentioned, baby wearing, getting them in a position where they're on your chest. And here you can modify the incline that you're going to have them on. So, you can start off where they're a little bit more upright, and then you can slowly lean yourself back to the point where, yes, you could be flat on the ground, and then they're really working to hold their head up, or eventually maybe pushing themselves up off the ground. So you can sort of modify that incline that they might be on. I think here, this is a great opportunity to even join them in that play of being on the ground. Maybe you do lay down next to them. Maybe you do lay down in front of them too, is another way that you can do it. So they can see your face. Your face is something they've seen since day one. Your voice is something they've heard very early in the womb. So those are some familiar sights and sounds that can really encourage them in the moment. And so, and then there's the point of, like, how much time do you spend there? Well, you do want to build it as a positive experience. So you watch for those signs of being a little fussy, a little frustrated, and you can move them out. And I know Jeanette often shows her clients some beautiful handling techniques of how you can get them in and out, which can lead to those different freedoms of how you can move. So not something we can just show here. It's really hard to explain in a verbal conversation, but do know that that's something that she does show parents as well as something that I do as well. So
I think, Melanie, one of the biggest keys about it is that you want to connect with them first, like look in their eyes, like make sure they're ready, and then you roll them into it, let them be there and play. But it's like you said, as soon as they're fussy, then you roll them out of it, reconnect and pick them up and give them a hug. And it's more about repetition. It's not about a baby crying, although they say that ones who hate tummy time the most need it the most. But we want to facilitate it in a way where they're not crying in tummy time. And I'd rather see a baby doing frequent 15 seconds on their belly time if that's all they can take before they get fussy. And then you work up from there. But it's not meant to be crying time, and it's not like, oh, let me put you on your belly.
Right. And it's not meant to be time, well, I got to set the timer and they have to stay in this position for this long because they need to develop all of these muscles. It's not that either. And so if we think about these daily routines that we get ourselves into, I mean, this can be a perfect time when, you know, you are getting baby dressed or their diaper changed, specifically when they're on the ground, if you're doing that, so that there's a little bit of freedom of movement that can happen where you might be able to join them in, you know, in that play. And exactly what you said, Jeanette, that idea of how you're even moving them, facilitating the movement, essentially. I did see some questions pop up too.
Yeah, so I was actually going to ask, Gretchen, one of our callers asked a great question. When's the best age to start tummy time?
Well, I would say, day one, hour one? You could start as early as you can, would be my advice. And some of that looks like even that, you know, skin to skin, chest to chest. There you go. You've already started that, and you've already gotten to my other point of touch there that's happening. So, and it's something that can happen frequently, you know, and like Jeanette said, it's quality over quantity of time that you're spending in that. And that repetition, you know, every time you get them changed, you know, have a diaper change, you can have an opportunity to get them in that position. And I think what is, did you have a question, Melissa?
Oh, sorry. No, keep going.
Okay. Well, because I was going to go into something that sort of piggybacks tummy time. So if there was a question.
So before you do that, one thing I just wanted to add is as a new mom, when I had my first, sometimes I was overwhelmed by these things I felt were very big tasks to do. Like, okay, I have to do tummy time and we have to get a certain time to do it. And it's got to be this big production. And one thing I've gotten better at the more kids I've had, just simply because I don't have the luxury of, you know, thinking about those things so long and so hard, is like with my third, my daughter Marcy, sometimes tummy time is just, I happen to have, you know, gotten on the ground to pick up some toys and she crawls over to me and, you know, or whatnot. And I play with her on the ground for a couple minutes. Right. So, you know, maybe you do one diaper change, you know, maybe the diaper change you do after your bath is on the ground on their towel, right? And then you kind of do some tummy time then. So I encourage new parents, because everything is very overwhelming in the beginning, you know, to not stress about it. That, like, just like you said, these can be little moments that you do that, you know, it doesn't have to be a big production that we, you know, and the other thing I would say is, again, something I've gotten better at the more kids I've had is, you know, babies are going to get frustrated at times when they're learning new things. And sometimes they might, And I know with my first, I was like so quick to pick him up, right? Like he hates this. He hates tummy time. Whereas again, with 3, I don't have the luxury of always picking up my daughter when she's fussing because I've got, you know, I'm wiping someone's bum on the toilet. Right. And, you know, so she's like the fastest crawler that we've ever had because she has had to figure it out, you know? So I totally agree that tummy time should not be a stressful, screaming, crying, you know, situation and you have to stay in it for this amount of time, but also know that babies are going to get frustrated at times when they're learning new things. And sometimes just giving a few extra seconds, counting to 5 or 10 and letting them work it out, they get so proud of themselves. It's actually kind of cute to watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a perfect tip there. It's not a production. It's not meant to be. And I think that's another thing that I will highlight as a parent who no longer has young babies. Do not be a cruise director. It's not like, oh, at 2:00, there's a song and dance show coming on, and then at 3, we're going to start our tummy time, masquerade party. No, it's not like, and it shouldn't be like that. So how do you fit it in your day? And you could already be doing this, and now oh, okay, I just put the baby on the ground. Now they have some tummy time going on. And I like the idea where you're sort of creating an opportunity that there might be a little huffing and puffing that happens in that position, a little squirming. And sometimes I always do like the 5-second, 10 seconds, like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, woo, and then look at you finished, you're all done, so you can even as yourself, give yourself some time to let them just, sort out that frustration, but know that you're going to soothe them right after. And tummy time, once that baby starts really moving and rolling, the opportunity of being on the ground is still something that I recommend. Being on it's not just developing those neck and back muscles after that point. There's so much that happens posturally. There's so much that happens in movement. There's drive and motivation. There's exploration that's happening now. So opportunity to be on the ground, will continue that first year. And parents who have very mobile babies know what that experience is like. So.
Yeah. Oh,
Hi,
also,
Diane.
hi. I'm here for my daughter who couldn't make it.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, but her baby is sitting. It's about 5.5 months, and it's really important to remember. I mean, once they go on to that next phase, I think people think they don't need the tummy anymore. They've gone on, they've moved on, but this baby still is not rolling over. Not because she can't, because she just isn't doing that. And the fear is always that, okay, well, we'll just move on. She's sitting now. Now we're going to, do more. It's
Right.
important to keep doing it until they get all those foundational skills. I think that's.
Yes. Thank you. As an experienced mom and grandma and OT, thank you, Diane.
Your daughter doesn't listen, but anyhow.
That's a whole other podcast at this point, right? Grandma knows too much, right?
Way too much.
You're right. And that was actually, the segue, which is perfect, is the idea of movement. And I say, get your baby in different positions all the time, different head positions. There's nothing better you can do than, tipping your baby to the side, this side, forward and back. And even if they can handle it upside down a little bit, tip them backwards and see what that's like. Like I mentioned, when they come out of the womb and are starting to experience gravity, one of the ways that we start to integrate that sense and build things like our balance and postural reactions is really how our head is orienting to that sense of gravity. And so if we're upright, we're still being stimulated by gravity, but when our head tilts, it's a whole different stimulation that's happening. When our head goes backwards, it's another type of stimulation. So we want to encourage those different head positions, and you can do this with young babies. The tempo of how you do it, the excursion of how you do it's going to look different. And as they get older, things like that can help facilitate movement are yourself, right? We've all done a little bouncing. We've all done the rocking. We've all done the tipping the baby back and forward. But you can even do this on a yoga ball. Is a perfect way of, think about those rhythmic movements that you can get of yourself and the baby together. And eventually when the baby has some more postural control, you can even sit them on the yoga ball and, tipping them side to side, forward and back. I encourage parents to really explore movement with their babies. And it's really a fun way to connect and play. because babies are experiencing something new. You're giving them a lot of developmental stimulation at that time. And, you can add other things to that type of play with them.
You know what that reminds me of, Melanie, when you said that, when you're talking about tipping the baby sideways, it reminds me of when I would go to the library for story time with my baby, and I went to kind of meet other parents and get out of the house. But as you're describing all this, I'm like, oh my God, the librarian is a genius, right? We're doing track to Boston, track to Lynn, watch out, little one, or you might fall in, right? And so, wow, I wonder if there's any librarians in your area, for those that are listening or watching, that are maybe doing like online Zoom baby and me, like music classes, like, especially in this, kind of quarantine social isolation stuff, because what a great way to learn some new songs and bond with your baby in that way, and actually doing something pretty scientific, it sounds like. So that's cool. Oh, I see right here, Magdalena saying the Northborough Library does. That's wonderful. Perfect. Thank you. Magdalena says Northborough Library does. So check that out if you're interested. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. I think that, we forget that all of these little games that seem just something you learned along the way actually can have some great developmental benefits. So yes, I think of, trot to Boston, trot to Lynn as one where you kind of, bouncing them and then they fall backwards. I've even added different movements to wheels on the bus. Wheels on the bus go round and round, and you can, spin with them. People on the bus go up and down. The wipers go swish, swish, swish. So, you can add movement to song at any time. I think this is where watching your baby's cues are, essential. I think that we all experience movement differently. That's why some people enjoy going to Six Flags and doing thrill rides, and why other people get seasick on a rocking chair. So I think that, it's really important to think about, how is my baby responding to this movement? As well as, how do you respond to movement? This is where parents' own sensitivities come in too. And so, you can watch for cues of it being too much by obviously them, crying. But even there can be I'm even thinking more cautiously, baby's skin color can change. Their eyes might widen, almost like a deer in headlights. Those are some signs that, yikes, this movement was a little too much for me. Doesn't mean that they don't like movement yet. It just means that whatever that was a little too frightening for me. And so you can, what's nice about movement, you can grade it. You can make it smaller. You can do less time. But moving in general is important. And I will say to that, as an occupational therapist, if you do find that your baby is very uncomfortable with movement, if that's something that comes up a lot for you, where they're feeling uncomfortable by being in different positions, or often fussy unless they're, really upright, that might be, that's when a referral could be really helpful, because being in those positions is what really helps develop a lot of that posture and this sort of core stability, eventually for things like sitting, crawling, walking, holding a pencil in school. So.
Melanie, one of our callers wrote a comment. She said, regards to sitting, I was always taught to avoid sitting baby up passively on their own on the floor, and to let them find the sitting position on their own instead. Keeps them moving instead of sitting on their bum. Is that something that you recommend as an OT, as far as sitting the baby up or letting them find that position on their own? Can you speak to that?
That's a good question. I mean, I think some of that comes up because there's a lot of this baby equipment now that sort of props babies in different positions. And what I will say to that is, often things like car seats are things that get propped, or there's those bumbo chairs, there's exercisers, and as a parent and sort of realistic moments in your life, there are times that you do need to put your baby somewhere where they're going to be safe for 5 minutes so you can cook dinner, or you can, get your mail outside. But these are not meant to enhance developmental, especially motor skills. And so the idea of passively sitting your baby down, well, I have a couple of thoughts. I mean, if that is the only position that they're comfortable in and they're not moving around, then yeah, perhaps they can't get themselves in that position without your help. So that would be a concern. But it's about balance. It's about finding some opportunities where they can, really figure out how they would get their body in that position. And maybe passively sitting could be, maybe they're sitting with you on your lap and looking at a book together, or maybe you're enjoying some, joint attention on a toy together. And for that, I don't feel like it's harmful to put them in a position so you could be looking at something together. I guess I'd have to know what else the baby is doing too.
Mm-hmm.
If I feel like there are, there's enough variations in their movement, then, putting them down to sit passively doesn't to me sound, harmful by any means. If that's the only way that they can get themselves in that position is by you putting them there, then that would probably not be something I would recommend. Okay. Are we good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the
Does
other
anybody have any questions before we, sorry to interrupt, Melanie. Does anybody else have any questions they want to unmute and ask Melanie about anything we've been talking about or anything else? All right. Awesome.
All right, some of this we sort of alluded to already, but something that I like to add into, maybe a play time, maybe it's an interaction time, is music, or song, or singing. These types of, or even rhythm. I mean, even if we get down to the basics of what song and music do, the idea of rhythm, I mean, all of us, physiologically, there's so much rhythm that keeps us alive, from our heartbeat to our breath, to all of the things that are working in your body at the same time are all based on rhythm. And so rhythm is really a great way that you can, change your baby's state. When we're talking about, babies being calm and alert, or maybe they're fussy, maybe they're really upset, we can get back to rhythm. And rhythm can happen in the movements that we just talked about, but it can also happen in music and in song. And so I think that's why a lot of times when you do participate or get to participate in mommy and baby groups, there's often, some song time and singing, because of the rhythm that it can provide, and also some predictability that it can give. And so, integrating some song into daily routine, especially I kind of think of if there's a song that your baby likes and you have to do something that they don't enjoy, like, at a certain age, they don't really enjoy getting their diaper changed because they want to move and they feel restricted. And, you know who that baby is.
That's the stage I'm in right now with my 9-month-old. Oh, she arches her back and screams, tries to crawl off the table. It's like, oh, God.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. It's like trying to grab like an eel at that point. They're just like, they're all of a sudden slippery, And so a song is a way that you can sort of entice them, but a song has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So it's a nice way to create some routine and ritual and boundaries around activities and routines that you're doing. And so some of the things that I even think about in that, if you're finding that your baby's a little more fussy, then a song that is very rhythmic, and you can even change the softness of your voice. And my go-to was always Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, because it had, a very repetitive beat. And you could sing it very softly. You could sing it very slowly. And that, the idea of that rhythm can really help slow their regulation down and bring them in a more calm space, perhaps. But maybe your baby is ready to move, and you can change the speed of the song that you're singing. You can make it a little bit more boisterous. If they don't like your singing, then I can't help you there. Maybe you just hum, or there's so much music on iTunes or, Amazon Music that you can play and join in with them. So.
One of the questions that I recently got from a person who took my childbirth class was if we could do a podcast on ways that grandparents can bond with the babies during this time of social isolation. because people have to stay separated. And when you're talking about song, this reminds me that I FaceTime with my 86-year-old grandmother every day with my daughter, because during the social isolation, it was very important to her that my daughter didn't forget who she was. So I make it a point to do that. And every time we Skype or FaceTime, she sings French songs to her. And so it's been like 5 weeks now. And every time my daughter hears that doodle-doodle-doo, doodle-doodle-doo, that we're dialing my grandmother, she gets so excited and starts to dance. And so what a wonderful way for the grandparents out there that, might even be listening, as a way to bond with your grandbabies during this time of social isolation, is finding some special songs that maybe were sung to you as a child, or that you sung to your children, that they can start to get excited to hear. It doesn't matter how many times my grandmother sings these songs, my daughter squeals with delight every single time. And so I just a thought I had about bringing the grandparents into this experience as well.
Oh, I love that. That's, and you actually just put into words a perfect example of how music can get us prepared to interact and play. You know, your daughter hears that music and I know what's coming. I know I'm going to do this, and I'm going to get my body ready to interact.
That's a good point, because she totally does that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a newborn wouldn't do this, but you're at perfect age. You know, that 9-month-old does know those kind of cues and signs. And so even starting some of this, I love the idea of having some rituals and routines in place. When we think about how our routines have been disrupted, well, we can start some new ones. But even ones with new babies, the idea of certain songs at certain times. And this might be great for, bedtime. It could be good to get ready in the morning time, to have, some specific music ready for that. And then I always like the idea of blending the music and rhythm and movement together. And so, songs while you're bouncing on the ball, something very specific to movement and rhythm could be even making a blanket hammock. If you can kind of picture what this would be, holding a large blanket or sheet and having your baby in the middle, and you kind of need 2 people for it, depending on how big the baby is. But you could have someone on each side. You could do a little swinging. You could do fast swinging. You could do some, some song and music with that too. And then you can kind of watch and see, does your baby want more? Do they want it more quiet? Do they want it more fast? And these are some great ways that you guys can learn to connect with each other, because you're reading their cues, and baby's learning, oh, mom knows when I do that, or dad knows when I do this, they're going to make it faster, or they're going to be more quiet because that's how I like it. So, I have another point for play, but before I do that, was there anything with the idea of movement and rhythm and music?
I had an idea too, is, we don't realize sometimes all the music we listen to while we're pregnant and in the house, and sometimes kids remember that music. If you play a certain genre a lot, or you play a certain musician, then you could play that when they're an infant, and you might be shocked that they actually hear that and they go, oh, I calm down. Or certain songs you play only in the car once you start driving more places a lot, and then they respond to that. And I think what I enjoyed with my kids was we didn't play a lot of kids music until we found, when they were a little older, there's certain kids music we liked, but we just played music we liked.
Right. That's fine too.
And sometimes kind of loud, because it was really loud in utero too. And so getting their attention as an infant, sometimes it's like, oh, there's loud music. And then they'd hear that rhythm. So definitely, if you can't sing, or you're not in a place where you want to be singing, sometimes just putting other music on that might be your favorite music could go a long way.
Right. And you don't want to listen to Baby Shark anymore. You can certainly put on your own music, right?
I remember, if I had an infant now, I would not be listening to that anyway.
Well, and you made a point too. I mean, it's funny how a lot of these senses develop very early in utero, and your auditory sense is one. And so, there have been studies of moms who read The Cat in the Hat while the babies were in utero, and when they came out, they found that they sort of measured this by the baby's sucking patterns, that when they heard the rhythm of The Cat in the Hat book, their rhythm of their sucking changed. So there is something to that, very much so. So yeah, even Even if your baby's not out on earthside, you can start, putting some music on that you like, that perhaps they'll like when they join you. Good point, though, Jeanette. You don't always have to listen to kid music. The other thing I was going to mention, and we've sort of talked about it along the way, was the idea of touch. When we think about our skin and all, underneath your skin lies many different touch receptors. Your skin is your biggest organ. And so if you want one way to really nourish the brain and get to all of that, is really by touching your baby and holding them. Infant massage is something that comes to mind that has some really great evidence, behind that. But, even without infant massage, opportunities of skin to skin, that's another sort of mainstream term and concept that people understand. And rightfully so, because the developing brain needs so much tactile input. And so massage might be something to think about. Even how you might use touch with your baby. The idea of, I always think about really sort of, it's more of a firm sort of continuous pressure that you can provide to to their arms and their back and their legs and their hands. Baby wearing, offers that really nice opportunity to give them a lot of that touch and tactile input. And, I call these the little baby explorers. As they start sort of exploring more of their environment, they can actually start feeling things on their own. And this might be getting different, swatches and patches of different types of materials. I know one of my mom's very talented friends made my son a quilt that had all of these different patches of material, like burlap and silk and corduroy and, what's that, like very soft, velvety sort of material. And, it was a great way to have them sort of feel and play on it. Input to their hands and them touching it with their feet are all great ways to really get some different ways of touch in there. So, believe
That's
it or
a
not,
great
all
point
that
too
holding.
about new babies.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really great point, new babies, the firm touch, because I like to remind parents as a labor and delivery nurse that your baby is used to a tight, muscular hug from your uterus.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes a baby's fussy and a parent will be like doing this like light,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like effleurage. And sometimes that like the baby starts to cry more, because that's a little bit of a weird sensation, especially to preemie babies. So, sometimes just hugging them with your hands or putting that firm pressure, that, gentle but firm, can remind babies of that hug from your womb, right?
Yeah.
So that's a great point.
Yeah, and I like how you differentiated the different types of touch that you can offer your baby. You're right. Think about, the world they just came from, it was very tight and there was a lot of compression, and that touch feels very comforting to them. Light touch will be alerting. Neurologically, light touch runs a totally different pathway and does alert and can be uncomfortable. And the deeper pressure is more what we call organizing and calming. It runs in a different sort of neurological tract. So that's another reason why. And so all of that holding and picking up and hugging and, smushing their cheeks, all of those things are, believe it or not, ways to interact, play, and, support development. And this is where, as an OT who's worked with sort of a range of children, this is where you might sometimes hear from parents, they never really liked to be cuddled. They were always uncomfortable by, touch around their face. They were never the babies that put things in their mouth. These could be signs that, touch or touch sensations might be more uncomfortable for them. And so it might be something else that you might notice, about your baby. And were there any questions about that before I kind of give some little play tips? No, we're good. Okay. we did sort of touch upon this about really watching your baby's cues, signs, and signals. Whenever, again, when giving these sort of tips about movement, about rhythm, about playing with that, songs and touch, it's all in the context of, how does my baby like this? How do I know they like this? What signs are they telling me that this feels good or they don't like it? And it's always nice when sort of introducing these things, or even if we're talking about play in general, whether it's new toys, new people, new demands, new foods, there's this opportunity to sort of wait and watch. And I think Melissa sort of illustrated that when she's talking about, sort of a baby getting a little fussy in that, in that prone or that belt, tummy time position. It's the wait and watch. What's happening right now? Can I give them a little time before I, stop this activity or take this away, or, pick them up and soothe them? And that wait and watch can give us a lot of cues. It could be maybe they really did enjoy it and they need a little more time to process it. Maybe they would like it if we, I kind of also think about it as if I've, doing a game where I might be, tipping a baby slowly backwards. What am I noticing? If I notice they like it, maybe I'll tip them a little further and see what happens. And then I bring them up and I wait and watch. So I think that that's an important tip. And your baby's going to have a different time scale for that. Every baby does. So this is where individuality certainly comes in. I would also say go at your baby's pace whenever you're trying to engage and connect. What kind of pace does your baby like? I know when my older son was younger, when I would come home, I'd have to kind of give him a little space before I would just want to ravish him up. He wasn't just grab him and ravish him. You have to kind of hey buddy, I'm home. How are you? And then you have to kind of give him time to be like, oh, okay, and then you could pick him up. So, going at your baby's pace will be really important to think about. And then, if they didn't like it, try it again. There are many, even use yourself for an example. There are things that you might not like the very first time, or you liked parts of it if it was this, so it's always fair to try things again. Play and engagement and connection should never be forced. So it's really about reading cues. And this could be a perfect opportunity to bring in, other people who work with babies. Maybe reading those cues is hard as a parent. There are many moments in the new parenting world, and even after they grow up, that you feel overwhelmed by everything that's happening. And so reading those cues can, obviously feeling overwhelmed, reading cues can be a little bit harder too. So this is oftentimes where it's helpful to get other people involved if that's hard for a parent.
That reminds me of, I learned later than I wish I would have learned, because my kids were already out of the stage where you would do this more often, but I learned that because of our reflexes and our reactions, that tickling is not a good thing to do to other humans.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a thing, I grew up with that, everybody tickles babies and small children,
Mm-hmm.
and then you continue on and maybe you tickle adults. And we don't it's very rare for someone to like tickling. We giggle, but it's it's an alarm reaction and we want people to stop usually. And so just kind of, I just wanted to pass that on, because I remember, it was such a common thing to be like, oh, tickle, tickle, tickle. Oh, can I make you giggle? And then I learned that that's actually not a good idea to be doing to even small children. So
I would agree, tickling, I'm sure there's something on it at this point about tickling. It certainly does sort of put a rise in your sympathetic nervous system about, ooh, what's going to happen? What's going on? And it is certainly a touch that can be more uncomfortable. Yes, people might giggle and laugh, but it could also be a sign that their nervous system's getting a little more overwhelmed by that experience.
But also, we don't tend to listen to people when we're tickling them and they say stop.
You're right. No, it's true. Right.
And that's even harder for that nervous
Right.
system to get back to regulation.
Absolutely. And I'm saying stop, and usually people read that cue of they don't do it anymore. And yeah, it's a very interesting game, I have to say. And it's still, it's certainly still out there, but I think that that's sort of, it's almost in that default play toolbox of like, okay, I know one way that I could get a kid to giggle, because that's often feedback that something feels good when they're giggling and laughing. And so tickling is a way to do it, but it doesn't mean that it feels good to the nervous system. In fact, there's a great book, not great for to do with your newborn or infant, but it's The Art of Roughhousing, it's called. And Larry Cohen is one of the authors, and he wrote like Playful Parenting, which is a great book. But he says, absolutely no tickling. He is, that is not a way to, do any sort of roughhouse and play. He has a no tickling rule. So I think he has more information about why, but good point when we're talking about touch, to not, and play tips. So anything, I do have just sort of some other considerations, but I wanted to check in that.
Go ahead. I don't see any questions at the moment.
Okay. I think the last thing, one of the last points I want to make, and probably is the most important one, is I want to take a moment to just think about, parents. We did a lot of talking about what babies like and what they need, and how to interact and how you might play with them. And the intention of this is not to become, like I said, their cruise director and activity director. And in fact, taking a moment to think about parents, I want you to think about also your availability to do this type of interaction and play. And I think, we can even think about the times right now where, we're all sort of living in a space of there being uncertainty, and maybe some people feel less safe. Maybe people are feeling more worried. And so cueing into, how you're feeling yourself, because yes, you are a parent, that might be your role, but, fundamentally you are an individual too, who has feelings. And these things change moment to moment and day to day. And, so much of us as humans being social beings is to attune to the emotions of the people around us. And so if we are the people who are going to be interacting with babies, it's really important to think about how you're feeling that day. And, I can't help but think, some of the situation now where you're right, families are much more isolated. Maybe they don't have that support system that can come help them. I think about, family members, grandparents, friends, neighbors who might be able to help along, even childcare providers, people that can offer opportunities of joint care, support you in your sort of parenting journey. All of that is not happening for parents now. And just like we are social beings, we are also, it does take a village to raise a child, not just the child, but to also support the parent too. Because this is a new role for many of you who are listening to this. And, it's really important that you also have opportunities to recharge and to replenish. And, finding that might be a little different now, but it's critical to really find that time.
That's a great segue into one of our upcoming episodes, Melanie, because I don't think it's this Wednesday. I think it's the following Wednesday. Be sure to check out babiesincommon.com/videocast for the date. But we're going to be interviewing a certified nurse midwife that's also a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and talking about getting treatment for perinatal mood disorders. Because perinatal mood disorders, which include things like postpartum depression and anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder, is the #1 complication of childbirth. And it's something that, especially in this time of social isolation, I know that as a nurse and many of my colleagues, doctors, midwives, are very concerned about seeing spikes in these things because of the isolation. One personal story I have to share is that I personally love singing. I love to sing with my terrible voice to my children all the time about every little silly thing. And one big red flag for me that helped me learn and admit to myself that I needed to talk to my husband and reach out for help for postpartum depression was when I couldn't sing to my son after bath time. I don't know how to describe it, but it was like I didn't even have a song to sing. I couldn't even make the song come out of my mouth. It was a weird experience, but that was something that was a big red flag to me, because, being able to play and be playful with my kids is something that I like to do. So if you're out there listening and that's something that you're struggling with, if you're hearing about all the different ways to interact and bond and play with your child and you're struggling to find a way to fit that in, think about that, and reach out, because that could be something that is going on as well.
I agree. Yeah, that was a very good point. And I think that, that upcoming topic is very much needed in this time. And I think even with that, I mean, there are, not speaking as an OT right now, but speaking as a mom, there are ups and downs to the whole process. There are days of feeling completely overwhelmed and days you feel like, oh my goodness, I have all this together. And so this is where, relationships do have these ups and downs, and they're meant to, because part of having a relationship is not always these moments of attunement and connection, but opportunities where you can repair the relationship. Always know that there's an opportunity to repair. And in fact, I read this, that don't think of yourself as being the master of connection and attunement with your baby. Think of yourself as being a master in repair, because it's okay to say to your baby, you know what, mommy's feeling really sad today, or I'm working really hard to be playful right now. I'm sorry, I'm going to need a little time to just sit right here for a second. Your baby might not understand all of that language, but they do in some way. And that practice of, saying, I'm sorry, or I'm feeling this way, I'm doing this right now, are actually really great ways that you can teach your child how they can help learn to regulate their body. Oh, mom tells me when she's feeling this way, she's going to go have some tea, or she's going to sit in her rocking chair. These are things that, your baby will start to realize. And as they start growing into toddlers and preschoolers, what are some things that they can do when they're having some big emotions? So, I think that it's all fun and dandy to play and bond with your baby, but also recognizing where you are at is essential. Oh, Melissa's choking over there.
Oh.
I think she took a sip of her tea and oopsies.
She's okay.
She's okay. All right, good.
Okay.
I can't see her in my screen anymore, but it was hard to keep talking knowing you were choking. But
I choke so often, I probably should get it looked at. So don't worry about me. I was trying to be discreet.
Well, it's funny because I'm on my phone and you're the face I'm looking at. So I was like, oh no, she's going down.
I'm going down, people. No, I'm back. I'm back in action.
I'm glad you're fine. Yeah. Okay.
That's awesome. Melanie, one thing that you reminded me of is somebody told me long ago, and some people have heard this already because I say it so often, but I like to pass on this phrase that helped me so much, was that when you're trying to talk to your child, when you're just not in the right mood, and it's very challenging in that moment, whether it's their behavior or yours, and just to be able to look at your child, even if they're 6 weeks old, and be like, I know it's really hard to be a baby your age, but it's even harder to be the parent of a baby your age. And in a way it mentally made me feel better, because I was getting out, but yet being very, sweet at the same time, but kind of acknowledging my own frustration.
Yeah.
My go-to was, you're not giving me a hard time, you're having a hard time. Writing myself.
Yes. I having a little mantra that you say to yourself like that, or say out loud, are really helpful in those moments of, can I get myself in this in a space to play, to bond, to connect. So all right, so I guess we can take some questions or thoughts, or
Anybody want to contribute anything you guys are doing? People are being quiet today. All right. So, Melanie, so what would be your favorite 3 activities to like actual, I mean, you mentioned some already, but are there others you wanted to add?
Oh, others I'd want to add. Oh, good question. So I'm more simplistic. I'm not in what I like to do, but if I'm thinking about, I'm calling them baby explorers because I think that sounds fun, where they're sort of moving and a little more mobile. I think getting couch cushions off the couch and onto the ground. So you could do some crawling over them. You can create forts with them, different ways that babies can figure out how to navigate the environment. And think about a couch cushion, it's a little less stable than the ground. So it gives some different sort of movement inputs. It gives some practice to those postural reactions that they're developing. So using couch cushions and pillows and making almost a pillow ground can be really fun. Let me think of other fun. I mean, I think using yourself, you are probably your baby's favorite toy. So your face, your voice, them sort of mimicking your body. They can do, even infants like newborns can mimic some of your mouth movements. And so, when a lot of people think of newborns, they don't think of them as playful creatures, but believe it or not, they have a lot of great skill. And, one of the things that they can do, I would probably say really hold them so that, they have, it's probably about, I'm terrible with distance. So I'm going to say it's probably like 12 or 13 inches from your face. I could be off. And when they're in that sort of calm, alert state and their eyes are open, just doing even a simple thing of having them follow your face as you sit there with them. Can they follow you? And it might be even following your voice, where you kind of say their name and see if they turn. Believe it or not, those little newborns know mom's, even dad's voices, or another partner that was not carrying the baby. They do know their voice too. So those are some really great ways that you can play with your newborn. They can even imitate some of simple mouth movements like sticking out your tongue. So those
I
would
just
be.
want to interject with that I love the sticking out your tongue trick. And so many parents that I meet don't know that babies can do that. And so really sticking your tongue out when they're really intently looking at you. And if they look like they're trying to stick their tongue out, but they can't, and you're having feeding problems, maybe you should call me or someone else.
Okay. Jeanette test, we'll call it that one, right?
Yeah, actually, my lactation consultant at the hospital that I gave birth at to my first was wonderful. She said, when you're getting the baby to latch, you say, open wide like a lion, right? And you're thinking a baby couldn't possibly ever do. I swear he would. He would do that. He would open wide like a lion.
There's a lot of research to show that they can imitate, some simple mouth movement, nothing complicated. They're not going to do like a, follow your tongue, but sticking out your tongue, opening the mouth, those are all ones that they can try to imitate. So.
Melanie, do you have like one book that you would maybe buy for a friend who's having a baby shower that specifically speaks to your OT, bonding and play? Is there anything that you would recommend? I don't know if there was, but just curious.
So I love books. And what I would say to that is I can't say that I have one book that I like, and I'm terrible with remembering names of titles. I think that I like to think about who the parent is and what they might find, really, really helpful. There's some that talk about like what to expect in the first year, not like what to expect when I'm expecting series, but there's one book that talks about different movement patterns and postures and reflexes. It's a little bit more technical. There's also a book that's more anthropologic, more sort of has an anthropology sort of approach to how you interact. I can get names if people really, really want them. There's probably a few, but there's not one.
Would you be able to maybe send us an email And we could
Sure.
like put it in the show notes. Awesome.
Sure.
That'd be
Yeah.
great. I'm a book person,
terrible
so
with names, so I have to look it up. But.
That'd be great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Awesome. Well, if anybody doesn't have another question, anybody? Anything else you want to say, Melissa?
Or maybe it's a comment. Maybe there's something that babies that you'd like to share, or an activity that you like that you found in this time. That could be really helpful to know.
I was just thinking about like the grandparents. Definitely that is a show we could do, but even some of the stuff you could have it's one thing to have your grandparent or another family member on the phone, but that's through a screen. And I think babies are smart enough to know that. So if they're available, or family or friends available to come to a window, even if that's a pretty soundproof window, you could have the phone on inside so they can hear. And then the singing and the moving and the faces and moving further away from the window and close up. I would think that would be so much more engaging than on a screen.
I know.
That's a great point.
I have been thinking about the grandparents who have these, really young grandbabies. I mean, they grow so fast. And, I just think about some of the time that's sort of escaped from some great I know. I know. I bet it is.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Up at our house.
Or even like bring a doll or something, or a pet or whatever. And like, even if you said like, okay, now you are going to hold my grandbaby like this, and you're going to go up in it. Cause that's what I would do if I was holding your baby. So I want you to do it the way I'm going to do it for a change. Right.
Yeah. Interject what you would want to do to that professional sitting baby. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe the parents will learn a new trick along the way. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Melanie. That was lots of good information.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for being on the call. And thanks again to Melanie. And she's actually getting ready to start a 4-week virtual infant development series for those of you with babies. So stay tuned. And if you haven't already, go on babiesincommon.com and sign up to be on our mailing list to be sure that you get alerted. I'll also be posting it on Facebook and Instagram, but it'll be a way that you can meet with Melanie once a week and do a series based on your baby's age and developmental level. So stay tuned for that. I'm excited. I finally convinced her to do that after all these years. And like always, we hope you'll participate in future episodes. We have more topics coming up. And Melissa, your turn.
Yeah, so again, like I always say, if you learned even just one tiny crumb of information that was helpful for you today, don't be stingy, and please text a friend who's either expecting, parenting, a new baby or whatnot, and tell them about our video cast. And if you want to laugh your stretch pants off while learning about childbirth, babies, and breastfeeding, please consider taking a live and interactive Zoom class with Jeanette or I during this time of social distancing. Virtual lactation consults and support groups are also available. And if you like us on Facebook, we're always posting great articles, videos, and resources to help you rock your birth and thrive as a new parent. The other thing I'd like to add is just like we mentioned today in the video cast, if you're looking for an interactive online baby and me type experience, 2 of our callers wrote in the chat that Northborough Library is doing them, as well as Tranquil Little Ones. There's a Zoom mommy and me yoga class for babies on Fridays. So be sure to check those out, or do a Google search and find something in your area. There's new and creative ways to interact with others and with your baby during this time of social distancing. So, Jeanette?
Awesome. All right. So our next episode is coming on Monday, May 4th at 5:30. And Melissa, I believe that one's about vaginal birth after C-section. Is that right?
It is actually about having a positive and empowering cesarean birth experience. Then we'll be talking about the next video cast. So we're going to have an awesome midwife that I used to work with that'll be on our video cast talking about her personal experience with having a cesarean birth for her first. It wasn't the birth that she had hoped for and wanted, but we're going to talk to her about how she made it a positive and empowering experience and how she helps other families that she takes care of have family-centered cesarean experiences. So I'm super excited about it. I hope you'll join us, because we are a community for you, even if we can't be with you, because we all have babies in common. Yay! Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.